We're just waiting for a few council members to join us here, so we'll pause just another moment. Good evening, Mayor.
How are you?
Doing real well, thank you. We're just waiting for a few more council members to join us, and then we'll get started.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Good. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Good.
Living the dream.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really
Happy to.
appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Happy to.
Well, it looks like we have all our council members here. Jody, City Clerk, if you could please start our recording. We're also live on Facebook this evening. I'll start by just saying welcome to everyone, to our community, our staff, council members, and guests. My name is Mike Remington, City Council Member and Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Duval. I will officially call to order our City Council Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. The time is now 5:31 in the evening. First item is good of the order. Is there anything from council members that you would like to share this evening? Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, you want me to go ahead and do that now, Mike?
Yes, Rick, that would be perfect.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, a couple of quick things. Let's see, the quick update on our growth survey that we performed, I think it was in March and April. Laura, Jennifer, Azella, and myself have discussed that. We're putting together a summary. We plan on presenting that to council. Jennifer, was that the next council meeting or was it in 2 council meetings? I don't even remember. Okay, Jennifer, your mute is on, but
I can't remember. I'd have to go back.
okay. Anyway, we will present that to council as soon as we have a summary of that. We will also no doubt recommend a workshop/retreat to discuss the actions that we want to try to take on as part of this survey. Also, a quick update on the Sound Cities Association PIC. I attended in Michelle's place. It was pretty uneventful. We did a member roundtable of the current election status. Talked about the affordable housing dashboard, which is still a work in progress as I understand it. And then the county planning policies that are being put together as a result of the Vision 2050 survey, which we of course responded to. And that's it.
Thank you. Other council members, Councilmember Hoag.
Thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to share that I did do a round of disc golf this week with Councilmember Lingle, Councilmember Naplin, and Elaine Sawyer. My big takeaway from this was I had no idea how popular that activity is. We were there from 6:30 till 8:30 at night, and it was packed. We had to let people go through because the beginner that I am, hitting barns and everything else, I just think that my big takeaway really is that I think it would be a fabulous thing for Duval, because it will just draw people to the area. And I hear that people are even playing at 7 in the morning. They drop in on their way to work. it's really fun for all ages. And I just was surprised how much I enjoyed it. So I just thought I'd share that.
Well, thank you for that personal update. It is something we're looking at here for the city as well. By the way, 7 a.m. for this retired guy is about middle of the night, so I probably would start disc golf later in the day. But thank you for the update. Other council members or staff? Well, not seeing any, we'll move on to our first item. I'm really pleased this evening. We have two gentlemen from the Association of Washington Cities. And one of the key topics that nearly every city is looking at now is the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Originally, we were looking in Duval at about 1.8 million that would come to our community to be able to decide what to do for everything from economic recovery. There's many things within the act that we can take a look. Certainly, we have a lot of needs in our community, including with businesses and individuals. There's a lot of service groups that still need a great deal of support. But the door's open for other things as well. And so this is one of the main topics. For council members who have requested that we have a workshop, we have been waiting to get a little bit more information out, and we're now past the middle of June where folks had asked us to wait. So hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be able to line up a workshop for council and the mayor. I think some of the items on there was, what's our vision for the future? What are the opportunities that we have here? So with that, I'd like to introduce Peter King and Jacob Ewing. They're here from Association of Washington Cities to give us more information. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Peter King, CEO of AWC. I'm here with Jacob Ewing, who's a policy analyst and our lead person on American Rescue Plan. So he's been feverishly answering questions for the last several months on the program. I think what we would do is, I understand we have about 10 minutes to make a presentation, and we've got about 15 minutes or so to answer any questions that may come up, but please feel free to interrupt as we go through. We've got a PowerPoint. I think that we'll probably go through this pretty quickly. Jacob's going to take the bulk of that. And he's got a screen share, or I think Jody may have the PowerPoint so we can pull that up. But just let me make a couple of introductory comments and a kind of a compare and contrast between the CARES Act, which was last year, and the American Rescue Plan. So under the CARES Act, which was enacted in March of 2020, there was direct funding from the federal government, but only to cities and counties that had population 500,000 or more. So in our state, Seattle was the only direct recipient from the city perspective of that money. The state also got CARES Act money, and the states had the option of sharing that money with cities and counties. And in our case, our governor did choose to share that fund, that amount of money pass through to cities. And with CARES Act money, there's about $187 million of CARES Act money that was allocated to cities throughout the state. And in that case, I think you're aware there were limits on where that money could be spent. The turnaround was pretty quick. It had to be spent by the end of last year, and it could not be used for revenue replacement. The point of contact for that money was the Department of Commerce. And we're happy to say that 98% of the funds that were allocated to cities and towns, 98% of that 187 million was spent, used, and allocated by the end of that period of time. So a year ago, then, when that happened, we began conversations with the National League of Cities. Many of us throughout the country were a little bit upset that the direct funding only went to the larger cities. We were fortunate in our state in that our governor chose to share that money. That was not the same in many states. We have a good working relationship with the governor, and he made a choice that he felt it was appropriate to get that money distributed through cities and towns. So we began conversations with the National League of Cities and with other associations of cities around the country to encourage Congress in the next round of funding, should there be some, that it should be direct, flexible funding, federal assistance to all cities and towns, regardless of population. So we were involved with the National League of Cities with a campaign that really lasted about a year to encourage Congress, not only for additional resources, but as they moved forward with what eventually become the American Rescue Plan, that it should include direct funding for all cities and towns. And in fact, that's what was passed with the American Rescue Plan. So Jacob, you want to pull up that?
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
PowerPoint? Yeah, I'll go through that first slide and then I'll turn it over to you. But again, feel free to chime in with questions if we have them as we go.
All right, can you see that all right?
Nope,
Nope, all right.
now we can, now I can.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect, good.
Okay. All right, let's move to the second slide. So we're now at the American Rescue Plan Act, and we're talking about funds that are available to cities and counties. It was passed by Congress in March. Washington cities will receive about $1.1 billion over the 2 years of the program. So non-entitlement cities, which are typically cities under 50,000 population, and Jacob can go into some of the differences in that, but non-entitlement cities will receive funds through the state and not through the state Department of Commerce this time, but it's through the Office of Financial Management working with the state treasurer's office will be the agency that's the direct point of contact for cities throughout this program. And again, different than CARES Act, cities will have until end of December of 2024 to obligate the funds and another 2 years to spend the funds. So you have until 2026 to have this money spent. So I think that's a key difference here between CARES Act and this money is there is time here. There isn't a rush. You can look very strategically at where you want to spend the monies that are coming to your city. I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Jacob and he can go through the presentation. But again, we're here to answer questions and he'll be the first one to say there are fewer answers than there are questions. So we'll do our best here.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. And yes, there are still a lot of questions to this point. Hopefully tonight we'll be able to give you a good overview. So thank you, Peter, for that introduction there. We'll start off with the big question that a lot of people have is how do we receive funds? On June 7th, the Office of Financial Management, OFM, sent out a letter to mayors and to clerks of non-entitlement cities with a list of requirements for the application process to receive funds through ARPA. If you did not, Jody or Madam Mayor, if you did not receive that letter, please contact OFM and they'll be happy to resend that to you. So OFM will work in partnership with the Office of the State Treasurer to distribute funds directly to cities. They're hoping that can be done just through a wire transfer. So it'll be very quick once they go through the process and ensure that everything is done correctly. Again, OFM has contacted each city that is eligible for these ARPA funds as non-entitlement units. Now, one key thing that we are bringing up is that while you do have until 2024 to obligate and 2026 to spend the funds, there is a time limit for non-entitlement cities to respond to OFM and get that application in. Right now, we are looking at a 60-day cutoff from June 7th in order for cities to respond with their application to OFM in order to get their funds. So we do encourage you to make sure you have that letter and to go through the items that are required. And I'll touch base on that a little bit later, but do just want to put a plug there that you don't have until 2024 to apply for the funds. You will want to get that done this summer. So in the beginning, I heard about 1.8 million from Councilmember Remington. Right now, while that was a projection that was given back in March, we are saying don't count your chickens before they hatch. We did see some changes with our entitlement cities. OFM is the only group that knows exactly how much your city will get. And even there, they won't know until your application comes in and they've started processing those payments. So I do just want to point out that your allocation will be based on your 2019 population estimate as per the federal government. And so that population is 8,107. So your allocation will be based on your population, and then it will also be capped at 75% of your most recent budget as of January 27th, 2020. So the example that we give there is if you have a budget of $1 million, the most that you could receive is $750,000. However, that would also depend on your population. So hopefully that just gives you a good idea of where you're at there. Now, your payments, your allocation will come in 2 payments. We're calling them tranches. The federal government's calling them tranches. It's a new word that we're all getting used to. But your first will come in 2021. OFM has said is if you get your application in by June 18th, they're hoping that they will have the first round of payments out June 27th. If you get it in after the 18th, it will come in the coming weeks. So that first tranche will come this year, and then next year, roughly 12 months after you received your first tranche, you'll receive your second tranche. And this was the big question, I think, at the beginning that I heard is how can funds be sent? And there's 5 main areas that you can spend your ARPA allocation. So the first is with the public health response. I'm going to go into a bit more detail in the following slides, but just want to give an overview here. So public health, you can also spend it to address the negative economic impacts caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The big one for a lot of our cities around the country are replacing lost revenues or helping fill those budget shortfalls. You can also provide premium pay to essential workers, which is something new and very exciting, as well as investing in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So here we can go into a bit more detail. With the public health response, with CARES Act, that was also a eligible response. We saw our counties really spend a lot of money setting up testing sites and things along those lines. But what's great about ARPA funds is that you can actually use these funds not only for mitigation activities, but also helping address any disparities in public health outcomes. So that would be things along the lines of mental health or substance misuse, domestic violence, things along those lines. So it is a way for you to look at your community and see what other effects have you had on the public health side of things because of COVID and make investments there. So definitely a bit more flexibility than CARES funds, and has the potential to really help make good investments in your public health in your community. For the negative economic impacts, this is also another very exciting area. I do know that with your CARES funds, you gave a lot of money to local businesses. I think it was $200-some thousand that Duval pushed back out into the local businesses, which was awesome to see. What's also great is that you were able to help households and individuals. So that could be rental assistance, that could be food assistance. What's also available is cities are allowed to do direct cash payments to individuals. So similar to what the federal government did with their stimulus payments, cities do have that option to give direct cash to individuals as well. So a lot of different ways that you could address those negative economic impacts in your community. Again, as I mentioned, another place that a lot of cities are interested at looking at is replacing lost public sector revenue. What is different here is it's not a line by line addressing losses in specific line items. It is looking at your overall budget. Treasury has put together a formula to figure out how to calculate out those revenue losses. And they do provide the ability to assume a 4.1% growth rate. So you can either figure out if you had, you can either use the calculation that they have or assume based off of that 4.1% growth rate. They also allow you to look at different periods of time between December 31st, 2020 and December 31st, 2023. So what that means is while you're getting this money in 2021, if you do see public sector revenue losses in the next couple of years due to COVID, you could actually use that money in the future as well. So that is something to consider as you look to use those funds to replace public sector revenue losses. Another great area is providing premium pay for essential workers. Now, this is meant for people who are regularly involved in in-person interactions. So that would be like grocery store workers, that'd be nursing home workers, people who are actually interacting with people, handing items to other people, things along those lines. It's not including teleworkers, but you as a city could provide grants or funds to eligible third-party employers to pay premium pay to those essential workers. We do just recommend following the Treasury guidance there and looking at Washington state law when it comes to retroactive pay, but that is an option for the city as well, as to provide that premium pay for essential workers. And finally, another great place is investing in our infrastructure, water, sewer, and broadband. I think it's been said many times, but we've seen with the switch to teleworking and for doing meetings from home that broadband is an essential need in our connected world. So There is the ability to invest in broadband infrastructure. They are asking that cities focus on unserved or underserved areas, with a focus on reaching a 25 megabytes per second download or a 3 megabyte per second upload. So they do have a couple clarifying points there. You are also allowed to work on drinking water infrastructure, on wastewater infrastructure for publicly owned facilities. Again, they're really looking for cities to invest in areas that might have a lack of funding over previous years. So looking for ways to help those lower income communities have better infrastructure in where they live. As I mentioned earlier, OFM did send out a letter with the application process and the required information for each city to submit. I won't go into great detail here, but everything that you need is a DUNS number. You'll need your tax ID number. You will also need to provide your total operating budget. And right now that is a bit vague. Treasury has given a definition, but that is one of the biggest questions we've been getting, is what's included in the operating budget. What we're advising cities right now, until Treasury puts out a definition, is that you want to total up the funds that you use to operate your city. And one thing to keep in mind as you put that list together is during your first reporting period coming up in September, you will need to provide the documents that you use to come up with that number to Treasury. So just keep that in mind as you figure out what that number is, that you want to make sure that you can back it up, that it's well documented how you came up with that number. And the most important thing is you want to make sure that you put your banking information there, so Treasury, so that OFM can get that money to you. You'll also need to make sure that you have an authorized individual sign that you're accepting the funds. That would typically be your mayor. And then there are two other documents that need to be signed. One is a terms and condition, and one is from the Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964. As I mentioned, you will be required to do annual reporting as a non-entitlement city. Your first reporting will cover the date from the date that you receive your funding until the end of September, and you'll need to submit the report by October 31st, 2021. From there out, the reports will be due October 31st of each year and will cover the full year. Now, another point here is you'll want to make sure that you keep your records for at least 5 years. What that means is you may need to keep records all the way up until 2031 if you are still spending funds up until 2026. One thing your city will need to do, and I'm sure your clerk is already on top of this, but having a sam.gov account, as Treasury will be using the sam.gov for collecting reports from cities. And as we wrap up here, just a couple of reminders. There still are a lot more questions than answers. Treasury is doing a fabulous job, a much better job than I expected with getting information out. They've been updating FAQs regularly. They've been putting on webinars. There's been a lot of great information coming out of Treasury. We also want to make sure that you're aware that, you know, the American Rescue Plan Act was a multi-trillion-dollar package. So there are a number of other federal funds that are going out into communities. So as you consider where you want to put your funds, make sure that you look at federal opportunities where the state is putting their money, and potentially even where your county is putting their money. You want to make sure that you're not doubling up on how you're spending your funds. As we mentioned too, you don't need to spend your money right away. You have until 2024 to allocate and 2026 to spend. So make sure that you do take time and really think about how you're going to spend your funds. We're also recommending that cities really collect community input, that you keep an eye out for real needs in your communities, take time to talk to people, gather input from local nonprofits or from other groups to really figure out what's the best way to distribute your funds. We've met with the state auditor's office and they reminded us to remind you to document. You know, their auditor's office will be looking at these funds just like they're looking at CARES funds, so make sure that you do have a good system in place for documenting not only how you came up with your decision, but how you're spending your funds as well. And then also take the time to remember your federal delegation, Senators Murray and Cantwell, as well as Representative Schreier. You want to make sure that they are involved and know how you're spending your funds. This is historic that all 19,000 cities in our country are getting direct federal funds. So do make sure that you let them know what you're doing with your funds. If you can, send them pictures. If you invested in new infrastructure, or if you set up a partnership with a local nonprofit, make sure that they're aware and they know what you're doing with your funds. There are a lot of great resources out there. Again, Treasury is a great resource. The National League of Cities has put together a lot of great documents about how to spend funds in those different categories, whether it's revenue loss or investing in infrastructure. If you have time, on the 18th, NLC is doing a webinar specifically to water infrastructure. And then, as always, MRSC and AWC, we're here as a resource for you as well. And for my final slide for contact information, what is surprising is that Treasury does have an email address and a phone number that you can actually reach out to with general questions. I've reached out twice. I've gotten responses both times. They do take about 5 to 7 days, but it is pretty crazy that you can actually email the federal government and get a response when you have a question. So just do know that that is available to you. The Office of Financial Management, again, if you're missing your letter or you have questions, you'll definitely want to reach out to them there. And as always, you can reach out to Peter King or myself if you have any questions. And with that, I'll stop screen sharing and we'll be happy to respond to any of your questions just now.
Wow, Peter, Jacob, I love the information, the insightful advice, very helpful. I think most of us were trying to take down notes, and we'll probably take the presentation if we have it and post it online for all of us as well. Well, with that, let's open it up for questions from council or staff. Wow. Councilmember Schaefer.
A little slow there. Let's see, I do have, I think, a couple of questions. Amy, I think it was Mayor Ockelander, I think it was you that put the attachment in our packet. Has our amount for Duval been finalized? Was I reading that correctly?
Yes, it has. And Ms. Mason, our finance director, for reference, is out with a child's high school graduation today. So we gave her a break tonight. It was important for her to be there. We did receive our official letter, and let's see, I'll open up our terms and conditions here. Okay, City of Duval is expected to receive a total of $2,263,053 in 2 equal payments of $1,131,526 in 2021 and 2022. So that's a significant increase over the original baseline estimate.
But yeah, that's what I thought I saw. So no, that's excellent. Good to know that. Second question, this is related to investment in infrastructure. If we have a project already planned, say an upgrade to our stormwater system that's going to cost a substantial amount, can we, instead of taking that money out of our general budget, can we redirect these funds to help pay for that, assuming the project is already in our planning cycle?
You know what, I'd have to go back and look for previously planned projects. I will take a look at that, and I can follow up with Mayor Ockelander and with Jody on that question. There is a significant section of the Treasury FAQs that deal with infrastructure, with that water and sewer and how it can be spent. So I'll double check on pre-planned projects and how that works out.
There were also lots of questions that came up because stormwater was not specifically called out in that infrastructure section. So I know they're in the FAQ, there's a lot of discussion about stormwater. So I'm sure the answer's in there.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. And I did read through the Treasury guidance on this, and I didn't see anything in there. I could have easily missed it, but I didn't see anything in there on previously planned projects or any restriction on investing in those.
Well, bless you if you read all that.
Great, thank you for the question. Other questions? Councilmember Naplin.
I do have a question, and maybe we haven't had enough time for other cities to start coming up with their ideas, but I'm looking for ways to invest this money could potentially, pay dividends down the line. It would provide long-term economic development to help us weather this storm if there's a downturn in the economy, and just trying to come up with ideas that would qualify. And I don't know if you've seen some creative ideas come out yet that have gone through some kind of testing of whether it does or doesn't qualify.
I guess my comment there is it's still really early, frankly. I know there are a number of cities that are, creating community discussions and having conversations among the council, but really kind of going through that same process of trying to identify, what makes the most sense strategically investing the money. Jacob, I don't know if you've heard anything specific.
Yeah, it's all very, very early in the process. We're hoping internally, that we'll start seeing some plans roll out early fall. That gives people time to get the money in to start those community sessions, talking amongst each other. But, I think it runs the whole gamut. There are cities that are talking about infrastructure investments. There are cities that are talking about, direct payments to low-income families. So it really does run the wide gamut of ways that cities are planning to spend these funds. But I think you have the right idea where you really do want to look at this as an investment in your community, and what can you do to make it have the most return and the longest term benefit for Duval.
And
Jacob touched on.
So I was going to just say for council's benefit, I've been talking to friends and colleagues at other cities, and I know there's a lot of cities that are doing work that's just not ready for prime time yet. And so they're doing their research before they bring it forth to their councils. And I'm in contact with several folks on that. From our perspective, we might want to wait until some of those larger jurisdictions can share that information, because it'll significantly decrease our legwork as well.
And I was just going to comment that Jacob made the comment about talking with other jurisdictions in the region. That's really important. I think one of the lessons learned on CARES Act was we had cities in certain regions doing lots of good things, but they weren't necessarily talking with their county, or they weren't necessarily talking with their neighboring cities. So it became confusing. And, the business community is saying, okay, I'm eligible for some support here, but the rules in this city are a little bit different than that. And there's a program I qualify for with the county, but that's different than the city. So I think spending some time up front coordinating that effort will pay dividends in the end.
I've heard the term strategic investment, strategic planning several times. I think that's so wise to, sometimes it's nice to be the first one out of the gate, but many times you're better off to look at opportunities that come up. And I'm sure there'll be some cities that spend their money relatively quickly and look back and wish they had taken a little more time to involve their citizens and really take time to see where those funds could best be spent, both economically as well as helping others out. Other questions or comments? City Clerk Jody Wyckoff.
Just wondering if there would be a way for the city, like if we had an idea to spend money on something, if we could get it pre-checked to see if it would qualify before we commit to that. Is that something that it would not be good to spend the money or commit to spending the money and then find out it wouldn't qualify?
So Treasury has addressed that a little bit, mostly on the infrastructure side of things, where they say they don't need to approve infrastructure projects. Really, their idea is they're putting out their FAQs, they're putting out guidance on how the funds can be spent. So checking it against that, really when it comes down to it, the goal of these funds is to strengthen cities and to, address critical needs from the COVID-19 pandemic. So as long as you are following the guidance from Treasury, you double check yourself against the FAQs, and you can show that the intent of that investment was to address the COVID-19 impact, I don't see a way that you could spend funds in an inadmissible way, as long as you are checking yourself against what Treasury's put out. And I will say one thing that's been nice, and Peter brought this up, Washington, we did have a dry run, we could say, with CARES Act funds last year. Again, Duval, I glanced over what you spent when it came to CARES funds, and it looks like you put $275,000 back into your local businesses. So you can look back at your experience with CARES funds, how that went, what went well, what didn't go well, what sort of positive impacts came out of that as well. So now is a good time that you could look back and see what sort of fruits are starting to come forth or have already come forth from that investment last year.
Do you think the other comment, we've had questions on the reporting requirements. So that the reporting requirements are going to go to US Treasury, not to this Department of Commerce. So we have been in conversations with the National League of Cities. They're looking at trying to develop a simple online tool that identifies the areas where, you know, the 5 buckets where money can be spent, where small cities will be able to use that tool to report to Treasury in a pretty efficient manner. So that's a project in works. It's not been launched yet, but we recognize that there is a burden here on managing federal funds. That, you know, some cities have never had federal money, and so it's a different way of managing it.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Well, not seeing any. Jacob, Peter, thank you for the presentation, for taking time to be here this evening. Over my career, I've interacted a lot with the Association of Washington Cities, and I just wanted to say, whether it was negotiations, finance, employment law, I mean, it just covered so many topics and things that were important to cities. And I appreciate the work that you do and being that support when we need it, especially here with the American Rescue Plan. We're all trying to get educated and all the information that's been coming out, and we see it's revised from time to time, but it is a huge help, and we appreciate your support.
Well, thank you. And, you know, first of many conversations, I hope. Mayor, sorry for interrupting.
Oh, you didn't interrupt at all. I just wanted to also, while you're here, put in a plug for the AWC annual conference next week. It is virtual, lots of great sessions lined up, and the more people that participate, you know, I think the more informed our council will be. So if you can do that. I know that many of the sessions are being recorded. I'm moderating a panel that's being recorded on Friday, and as I understand it, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, that most sessions will be recorded and available after the fact. So even if you sign up for the conference and can't attend when it's happening, you'll have the opportunity to go back for the next several months and view the sessions.
That's correct. I think there are a couple ones that we're not recording, but I think we're going to have them available through the end of September, as I recall. So yeah, that's correct.
Well, thank you again for joining us. You're always welcome to stay for the other exciting topics, but I understand if you need to run and spend time with families as well.
Well, appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. You take
Bye.
care. Have a good night. Well, we'll move on to our next topic, city administrator recruitment process and job description with interim city administrator, Mr. Ryan Cotton. Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council, Mayor Ogalander. I have been on a journey since arriving in Duval, and that journey has allowed me to assist in a variety of ways, principally related to human resources. I think the largest part of that journey is going to be assisting in the recruitment and your hire of a city administrator. So I wanted to share a little bit about the mission and vision. I want to share a little bit about the journey I've been on. I'm going to share a little bit about what appears to me to be some good outcomes, and the fact that July is going to be a crescendo in relation to council requested review, the details as well as the action. And hopefully then we'll be off and running for all good things to happen. So first, the mission is to help recruit the city administrator. The vision that I have is more than that. The vision is to see if I can do everything possible to align the sun and the moon and the stars in Duval so that there is maximum success, there is maximum outcome, and there's maximum satisfaction on the part of all concerned. So that is the vision, and everything that I say and speak on this subject, I think should be evaluated according to that possible outcome. So the first thing I did when I began this journey in earnest was to look at the job description. And then that led me to wonder, well, what does the Duval Municipal Code say about the city administrator? Well, the answer is not much. It says the city administrator cannot earn overtime. That is it. One provision and that's it. So that led me to speak to the mayor, to the city attorney, and also to a colleague of mine who's the city administrator in Kent, who I've known from the past, and compared notes. The conclusions that I have that seem to be mutual is that a community is best off, if you're going to have a city administrator, to have some municipal code provisions regarding that position that the job description will then build off of. So there's alignment between the official law and the official duties. So I began to look at I was suggested that I look at 2 different municipal codes, and then I've provided some of these samples to our city attorney to give his review, and I haven't heard back yet, and that's why it's not in your packet, because I don't want to get the cart before the horse. But going from 1 provision to 11 provisions is basically what the recommendation is going to be. I'm going to take a minute. I try to be succinct, but tonight there is an exception. It's 6:10. I think I have 15 minutes. So someone give me a signal if I overstay my welcome. But I'm just gonna verbalize some of these major possible provisions for your consideration next month. One would be appointment of the city administrator. It's pretty clear under everything I've read that the mayor appoints the city administrator and holds office at the pleasure of the mayor. That seems to be pretty standard. The next is duties and responsibilities. The city administrator is viewed often as the head of the administrative branch of the city government, being responsible to the mayor for the proper administration of affairs of the city, and performs other duties as requested by the city council and as directed by the mayor. Another provision under that is to have general supervision over the administrative affairs of the city. A third provision is subject to the concurrence of the mayor to appoint and remove at any time all department heads and employees of the city, and subject to the provisions of any laws and other rules and civil service, that kind of thing. Moving along, what else would the city administrator do? Well, subject to the concurrence of the mayor, recommend for adoption by the city council of such measures as they may deem necessary or expedient. Just to remind you, that's a recommendation and council's the final decision maker. To prepare and submit to the mayor and city council such reports as may be required or as may be deemed advisable. I have not submitted much to you directly as an interim. I'm not really kind of in the loop here for some of this administrative action at this point. I'm kind of carving out the human resource functions, but the person who succeeds me as an interim will be doing much, much more along those lines. To keep the mayor and the city council fully advised of the financial condition of the city and its future needs, to coordinate finance director, department heads, and other staff input, and then prepare and submit to the mayor a tentative budget for the next biennium. So what about the city administrator's authority? So that's what the person would do. What about the authority? So some of the language elsewhere is the city administrator may authorize the head of a department or office responsible to appoint or remove subordinates in such department or office. So there's a chain of command, a line of authority that begins with the mayor, that involves the city council, and then extends through the city administrator to the department head and their staffs. What about appointments? Well, appointments would be made under the authority of the city administrator, subject to executive and administrative ability. So that makes sure that someone doesn't appoint their cousin, nephew, neighbor, friend. It's based on executive and administrative ability, and that's very much in line with what Duval's personnel code says now. Something called Exhibit A creates that need already, but it's nice to have that clearly stated for the city administrator. And last, city administrator. interference by city council members. What I'm about to read is very standard in every community that I've ever served. I also see it something like this in the council rules of procedure that the ad hoc committee is reviewing. So this language would read, and I'm reading from, in this case, City of Clyde Hill. Neither the city council nor any of its committees or members shall direct or request the appointment of any person to or their removal from office by the city administrator. Once again, trying to avoid friends, neighbors, cousins, second cousins, etc., from getting appointed. Except for the purpose of inquiry, the city council and its members shall deal with the administrative service solely through the administrator. And neither the city council nor any committee or member thereof shall give orders to any subordinate of the city administrator, either publicly or privately. So that's intended to, once again, with the line of authority that I've mentioned, it's to be at best clear, consistent, and efficient, and also to avoid confusion that can easily arise. You know, if there's many cooks in the kitchen, usually the soup is spoiled. However, nothing herein shall be construed to prohibit the city council while in open session from fully and freely discussing with the administrator anything pertaining to appointments or removals of city officers, employees, and city affairs. So everything's on the table in that venue. So those are the 11 provisions that seem to have some commonality in my research, and I've forwarded to the city attorney. I'm going to pause there to see what kinds of thoughts or suggestions you have, and then go into a reverse chronology as to how this all would flow through between now and November 1st. But I want to pause and just see where you're at on what I've read.
Well, just look for hands here. Anyone's got a question. I will say, Ryan, I so deeply appreciate your being upfront and sharing those. Very helpful for us to actually hear language, be able to think about it, and be able to provide feedback in a timely manner. Council members, any questions or feedback, staff members for City Administrator? Councilmember Brudnicki and then Councilmember Langle.
I really appreciate having you write that all out for us, because when we first attempted this, there wasn't that kind of clarity, and really understanding what the role is, the responsibilities, and how that works in our governance is really important as we go down this road. So thank you for carving all that out for us.
Thank you. Councilmember Langle. I think we've got you on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like you to keep going with your line of thinking. We have council committees. So how would that next piece work for council committees? Would the city administrator then be the ex officio participant in those meetings? Right now, the way our procedures are written, they're council committees. City staff participate at, I guess, at the pleasure of the, I mean, we've never been this strident, but participate at the request of the committee members. So how would that interface work then as we take it down to the next step of council committees?
Excellent point, and thank you for mentioning that. I have not seen any code provisions. This is about municipal code associated with how those committees would function. I have seen it in the council procedures, language about how it would function. And I think that's the next chapter we're going to be dealing with. So I think it's something that will evolve as we look at it. My own personal thinking is that these committees would each have a liaison appointed by the city administrator, and that liaison, like Dana for the Finance and Administration Committee, who would then interface the most, but would involve the city administrator during crucial times when it's important to get everyone on the same page and or moderate or assist. So that's pretty similar to what you have now, I think, except I, as the interim, I'm not in the line of, or the loop to get all the agendas and be at all the meetings, nor should I be. I'm not suggesting that, nor should the full-time person. But I think they would want to be more cognizant of what's going on than I have the time or ability to do at this juncture.
Councilmember Napman.
For me, it's helpful to see it written down instead of just verbally. So I may have additional input that I'm not able to formulate just after hearing it one time. But one thing, lost my train of thought. Hang on a second. I was thinking about something else and then I raised my hand.
So Jennifer, while you're thinking,
I remember. It came to me.
Go ahead.
One thing that's helpful in regards to the job duties, responsibility, the authority, how all that works is I like your suggestions. They sound just on surface, like I said, I need to see them in writing. But could you provide some of the materials you use to formulate those? Like if you have samples from other cities of this is, what other cities have done, because it would be really helpful to see the variation of how this occurs depending on size of city and different things like that. I think that would really be helpful for me. So if just some of your...
Yeah, I absolutely will. And this is I'm not getting the cart before the horse here. So I wanted to verbalize it I don't want to also say I know everything yet. I will eventually. No, I'm just kidding. I'll never know everything. But you will get that all in writing for the next time we talk about this. And it'll have some attorney input. And I'm hoping that Daniel will tell us some things about his other communities that he serves, Gig Harbor and Mukilteo, if I'm saying it right. So yes, yes, and yes.
That'd be great. And maybe some smaller cities too. I think Gig Harbor and Mukilteo are still quite a bit bigger than us, but yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Will do.
Jennifer. So Mr. Cotton, I don't know that Jennifer asked directly, but it sounds like if we could have you send us your draft language so that folks that want to see the actual written language could take a peek as well. When you're ready to do that, that would be helpful for us.
Yes, will do.
Great, thank you. Questions from other council members?
Well, if not, I wonder if Jody can give me a hand here and put up that reverse chronology on the Excel spreadsheet.
And this is the process, Ryan, for getting to that November point when we'd like to have somebody in the seat full time.
That's perfect, Jody. If you could scroll down just a tad, there we are. So everything that has yellow associated with it are where, I don't know exactly if they qualify as council touches, but certainly council would have a role and there'd be opportunity for dialogue, public comment, the whole 9 yards. So tonight, the week of June 14th is obviously 15th, but that's why I have it set up, is some review of the Duval Municipal Code. I say a draft, but I don't have, as I mentioned, I want to have legal review first. And the concepts that I've just voiced, the job description will build off of. And that's eventually intended to come before the July 6th council meeting for a first touch or whichever version you prefer. If you can scroll all the way up to, well, you can see it up to the top, November 1st, city administrator, the new person, to start in earnest with initiation of a new strategic planning process. That is assuming that on October 18th, the council approves an agenda bill associated with the strategic planning process. It also assumes, oops, I didn't highlight it, that there is a city council approval of a employment agreement. Okay, October 4th is where that's shown. So that should have been highlighted. I suggest that some of these are special meetings to stay on track. Why is it important to stay on track? Well, I think it's really good if someone starts end of October, early November, as opposed to waiting through the holidays. It's also important so that I can make my exit stage left, and November 1st is, or November 4th, I think, is when I would intend to do that after some orientation period. So with that being said, some of the other yellow highlights going back to the week of July 5th is agenda bill on the mayor's recommendation to formally initiate the recruitment associated with a salary and a range. There's more research needed. An agenda bill for City Council's review of some amendments to the Duval Municipal Code. July 19th, maybe second, third approval, whatever it is, of the Duval Municipal Code. And then August 16th is with that timetable, we would have a review of a summary list of candidates and have what I call a go, no-go decision. Are you satisfied with the quality that we got, with the number that we got? And if so, then we move forward according to this calendar. And you can see everything else involves, lots of due diligence. I want to touch on, there's first and second interviews. I think Washington law allows us to be in closed session, but I have to double check that. Then on September 20th, I have the suggestion that that be the actual selection time period, and that the City Council also talk about a strategic planning process. Why am I involving and combining these two subject matters? It's been my experience that communities are most successful who have strategic plans, 5-10 years in length, and that those plans coincide with major staff changes or major electoral changes. In this case, there is clearly major staff change, and there will be some electoral changes. So involving the new faces in this process establishes, once again, alignment and clarity on what it is that a community wants and hopes and dreams to achieve. So I'm going to stop there and answer any questions I can, but that's the skeleton of how I see us proceeding, and we'll put meat on the bones as we go.
Very thorough. Council, any questions? Ryan, it seems so thorough that you answered any questions that we might have on that schedule. It's quite full, and I appreciate your advice about trying to get this done early and being able to have strategic planning be an important part of that. And certainly you've already brought up updating our municipal code. I think we recognize there's a lot of things in the code that are ready to be updated, and this will be key to success. So thank you for looking at that as well. One more time, Council, any questions, comments, feedback? Yeah, Mr. Cotton.
Two more things I'm going to squeeze in. The first is that there's been talk about the retreat for purposes of figuring out the ARPA funding. I've been suggesting that's also a good idea to talk about things like the council procedures that might be far further along at that point. Maybe some governance facilitation or training, once again, to fine tune all of the procedures. The second thing, as you think about that, is there will be a process. I need to contact with each of you in the next 2 weeks to get your thoughts. I've done this, I did this informally when I first met you during your orientation of me, but there was a form I'm going to send out to you that I don't want you to fill out necessarily, unless you want to. I want to interview you with the form in front of you, so I can make sure that I understand what seems best to each one of you as to your most successful outcome for hiring a city administrator. So you'll see that in the email, and then eventually you'll have me reach out to you and try to set up a time to spend 20 minutes or a half hour together. And we'll probably do it remotely, but if you prefer, we can do it in person. Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Ryan. For me personally, you can just write down your qualities, because that's what I'm looking for. I couldn't be more pleased with who you are and the experience you bring.
We found a unicorn, and it's going to be hard to fill the shoes that Mr. Cotton has already filled in such a short period of time with a full-time employee. So I know that the work that comes out of this is something that's going to be with the city for a long time, and it's much appreciated.
Well, it's a big step for our community. Again, thank you, Ryan. We'll move on to our next topic. It's on-call contracts. We've asked our city attorney, Daniel Kinney, to join us. And thank you for being here. We, at our last meeting, had an opportunity to just talk briefly about some of what the outline would look like. We did send that out to council members. I think it's a 2 or 3 page document. It's really not part of our, we're not adopting anything. There's no agenda bill. We simply really on the Finance Administration Committee working with staff came to an agreement on what this interim bridge might look like, because we do have contracts expiring in a little less than 2 weeks. So with that, it's a chance to talk about it, to ask any questions. We'll certainly have time during council as well, but we wanted to have it less formal here. Daniel, I'll bring you in. I don't know if you want to set the stage here or if we just simply want to see if there are questions.
Okay, I had a couple technical issues there. You may have seen me pop on and pop back off, but I think you guys can hear me, and my computer is functioning. So here I am. So I think, well, I'm open to whatever process you like. I think questions, just to make sure everybody's comfortable with it, is a great place to either start or finish. I guess I'll just kind of preface by saying, this was the structure of this process here was put forward by FAC. It comes from MRSC. And so it is a kind of a known quantity, if you will. And I think we made some revisions as a group to make it usable for the city. There are some bullet points at the end, kind of under the additional information that sets kind of the foundation for what to expect from this. So I think it might be useful to go through those, because I think that's kind of big picture stuff. And then the details on the thresholds if we've got questions. So under additional information, number 1, the thresholds that are identified in the 3 categories above are the not to exceed amounts for a full 3-year term for an on-call contract. And so it's a reasonable estimate if it went the whole time. The contracts, though, are going to be 2-year terms with 1 additional 1-year extension granted by the director. And so even though the initial term is 2 years, the threshold determination, if you will, for which category it falls into is if it went for the full 3 years. And that's just to make sure that we don't start small and then have it cross a threshold with the director's approval. So the expectations for how this is going to get used are outlined in number 3. So administration is going to select existing on-call contracts and will commence using the procedure in the next 6 months. It's the 6 months for the extension that's being granted. That's what the agenda bill is actually for. There's no exact number on how many you get done in that 6 months, but administration has consistently, committed to moving these forward, using these procedures, and using diligent efforts. And I think it's important to note that not all will get done, and there's no specific number. So don't get alarmed if 3 get done instead of 6 or 2 instead of 4 or vice versa. So I just want to make sure that everybody has those expectations. And of course, because not all are going to get done in this 6 months extension, there will be another need for an extension for some, but not all of the on-call contracts as this process moves forward. And of course, one nice thing about doing this is that we'll have lessons learned in this process as the full policy is getting established. And so this can be fine-tuned for that full policy adoption while administration goes through and uses this policy for some of these items. So one thing I note in number 4 is that as we go through, we're going to have an extension for 6 months, hopefully starting tonight or authorized tonight. And then for those first few that you go through, or that administration goes through, that staff goes through to use the policy, there's a potential that the existing on-call contractor could get that contract again. And so that can be extended. There is also a possibility that using this process will result in a different contractor getting awarded the contract. And so for a fairly short period of time, you could have 2 on-call contractors for some sort of engineering services or whatever that may be. All of these are on a work order basis. And so just because you have 2 doesn't mean that 2 people are going to get paid any certain amount or anything like that. Staff would select the one to use and issue a work order for it. So that should be fine. Just wanted to, just in case, you see another contract come through. And then there's just some clarification here that, in my view, this is not needed here, but it is a useful tool for everybody, I think. So the on-call contracts are supposed to be used for specific purposes, not for projects, but for kind of ongoing regular needs. And so, staff is committed to, keep being aware of that and using these for the appropriate purposes. And so there's some clarification on what those might be. So it's not going to be for a specific public works project or specific architecture, design of a city structure or something like that. That's a project and would be used, go through a process all its own. And so I'll just quickly pivot back up to the 3 thresholds just to give the big picture of what they are. And then we can, have questions if there are any. The lowest threshold is $0 to $25,000. And this is, as you can see, the lowest process. And the staff would select 1 to 3 qualified firms from the MRSC roster, which is already pre-established and has qualified contractors available to select from. And you ask for proposals. It's a very quick submission from the city, about a page. It's estimated at that so that they can give just a little bit more information about the city specific need as opposed to the roster. And then the response would be a little bit of additional information, not to exceed 3 pages. The goal is not to overwhelm staff in such a small contract, but we're going to give them a little bit more information about the city specific need. They'll give a little bit more information about their response to that city specific need. And then they'll be evaluated using criteria, and then staff can negotiate a contract. So that's the lowest threshold in very quick sense. The next threshold is 25,000 to 100,000. So we're getting bigger here. This is basically just the last process, just beefed up. So select 3 to 5 qualified firms from the roster. And you could obviously advertise if you wanted to, but then it's prepare a written solicitation. So we're just going to increase the information that the city gives to them because we're talking about something bigger, more involved. We want to let them know more information about what the city wants. So that's estimated at 5 pages. And then send to a minimum of 3 firms. And so it can be emailed, and then their response would be 5 pages. So again, it's a similar process to the first one to get a certain quantity of firms engaged in the process, the city's information going to them, their information coming back. And in this one, just a little bit more information. Again, we don't want them to give us a canned 30-page qualifications or anything like that. We've already got their canned stuff from the MRSC roster. So this is going to give us, the nuggets of information that we could use and need. And again, evaluate that with criteria and negotiated contract, and then document it all. And then the final threshold is over 100,000. I think the reality is a fair number of the on-call contracts that the city has may fall over this, and I think everybody knows that. Maybe some are below, but this is going to be one that probably is going to be used a bit. And this is going to be a formal solicitation. It can be an RFP or an RFQ, depending on the needs. And it would be a city-initiated process. So it's going to notify firms of the solicitation by publishing in appropriate locations. We recognize that depending on the type of work, there are multiple locations that would be appropriate for that type of work. It's not merely go to the MRSC roster and pull people like the prior 2 thresholds, but it's going to be get it out to the industry groups, the listservs, post board, job boards, or whatever it is for that type of work. Also posting it to the website, develop score sheets to use by evaluators. And then if the response is less than expected, issuing the RFP or RFQ to a minimum of 6 firms from the roster, from the MRSC roster. So if you go through your process and you only get 2 or 3, and you really want to see more competition and want to evaluate more, you can use that MRSC roster to beef it up. But our baseline is not the roster like it is in the first 2. There's the ability to do answers with addenda that's similar to normal process, receive the proposals, evaluate them against criteria, have interviews with them, and then determine the winner based upon scoring. And so you're going to have criteria to do this. Again, this is just a more formalized process compared to the other 2 thresholds or categories. And so that's a fairly quick summary of the 3 categories. It's just incrementally a little bit more in terms of information to and from the contractors, publishing and notifying potential contractors throughout the process. So it's pretty quick. If anybody that was part of those conversations wants to chime in and correct me on anything I said, great. Or if we have questions, we can discuss.
Thank you, Daniel. Nicely done. I mentioned earlier that we're not asking you to vote on that procedure per se, but we have agreed with staff that that'll be the procedure. What you will vote on an agenda bill tonight is on the short-term bridge to extend these contracts until we can start this larger process that Daniel described. At the end, eventually this will be a part of the procurement policy, which will come forward to council. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm really pleased about the collaboration with staff and working with Daniel to come up with language. Much of that was from MRSC. So questions from council on this? I think those of us on the committee have discussed it enough, and I think staff is probably happy to see this go away for a while. It's been a long process. Well, if there aren't questions or feedback, we can move on. Councilmember Branicki.
Yeah, I was just wondering, was the whole purpose, since we've discussed this quite a bit, and I'm trying to still wrap my brain around all of the details, was the purpose of creating this new policy system to create better efficiency? What was the goal and purpose, really? And I guess my bigger concern was that, there's certain contracts that we do with infrastructure and stuff that I guess I was just wondering, are we going to now go out all the time for those contracts instead of maintaining those contracts? Is that the goal? Is that what we want to do? I'm just trying to understand.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Kenny.
And I will absolutely defer to the committee, of course, because it was your work that drove this. But I just wanted to clarify one thing. That, again, this wouldn't cover that right now. This wouldn't cover project work, and so an infrastructure project or something like that. That's not what's being covered here. And I would view this policy as being consistent with the requirements of the current code. And so this is basically just putting more meat on the bones of what we have, while kind of that policy itself gets beefed up by you all. And I think that it provides a little bit more of a known process for everybody, both internally with staff and for council on, how many people are going to get talked to, that there's going to be criteria and a selection process at different levels. And so I think my takeaway was we're just creating a little bit more of a uniform, across council and administration understanding of how this is going to be used. And of course, I'll defer to the committee for the rest of it.
Thank you, Daniel. And Diane, thanks for your question. You've been real upfront that we need to make sure that we help streamline the process and not just make it too onerous, especially with our smaller staff. I will say from the committee standpoint, one of the goals was trying to avoid contracts where we go 10 years or more without really stopping to review those. And this provides a setup really where you're reviewing them every, you can go 2 years with an extension, but after that, you really need to have outreach to see if there's a less expensive company, a more qualified company. I mean, there's different categories. With staff, they certainly wanted to have as smooth a process as possible. And I think that as the procurement policy comes out, one of the things you'll see incorporated is more of these won't be brought in as an agenda bill with a lot of discussion. They'll simply be on how come I can't remember it? Oh, the consent agenda. I'm sorry. It'll be on the consent agenda. It's a more streamlined process. Council still has a chance to see what those contracts look like. So I think we tried to find that balance, Diane, between adding process and making sure that we're following what's kind of an industry standard that MRSC has recommended, what other cities are doing. Right now, staff's just following our Duval Municipal Code, which is a bit out of date. It does include additional steps, as Daniel nicely said, a little more meat on the bones. So there's a little more work. But for smaller contracts, they simply make, as Daniel said, contact 3 companies and pick the one that's best qualified. So larger ones certainly are a bigger lift and more process as well. So I don't know if that answered it fully, Diane, but we've tried to listen to other council members as well and make sure that we could.
Councilmember Remington, you did answer my question. Yes, fully. Thank you. I just wanted to be certain that in such situations as like the sewer treatment plant and the sort of contracts we have with that, that we don't throw a monkey's wrench into that process. That's all.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The staff was very good about saying, boy, some of these contractors we've worked with, they've designed the system. You don't have to spend a lot of extra time, but they also understood that there is a time to have further outreach and see if there's somebody else might be more qualified. Sometimes those kind of changes in life lead to things you didn't know you could have. And you say, gee, I could have had a V8, So I expect staff will find this fairly efficient over time, especially if we can have some of these coming on consent agenda. Other questions or feedback? Well, not seeing any. I don't have other things on our agenda, and I think all of us would appreciate having a little extra time. We're about 14 minutes before we start council. So if there is nothing else, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everyone. See you in a few minutes at City Council meeting.